How would I describe Pittsburgh weather? Gray.
It's gray days, man. Very depressing.
Classic Pittsburgh weather. I would describe it as bipolar. You pretty much never know what you're gonna get.
Seems like a lot of cloudy days. I don't know how statistically accurate that is in comparison to other cities, but it seems like we have a lot of cloudy days.
There's not enough sunlight. It's way too cold.
If you happen to catch it on a good day, though, you'll notice the moods of everyone around you elevated and extremely happy, just due to the fact that I think we're all accustomed to gray skies for the majority of the year.
I absolutely hate the weather here. I always say, especially if it's going to be really cold and ugly, I'm like, at least snow, so that we can stay home. But growing up, I loved the snow aspect of it. But if there was no snow on the ground in a pretty way, not that like snow that's been there for a long time, but it was very depressing. It affected me a lot, especially the coming home from school and it's like already dark and you go to school in the dark and you come home in the dark and you're in a building all day long. And so you really just feel like you're in a dungeon. I mean, I think a lot of people cope by creating community around sports. I think that is primarily the way that people cope in Pittsburgh, generally speaking. Seasonal affect disorder is actually really interesting because most people think about it as being a winter thing. And though that's true, it's also something that can happen to many people in the summer. At least when you're talking about winter, the winter blues. I would express it as a sort of depression that sets in as a result of, it getting dark early, being inside more. You get particularly sleepy often. It will mimic depression symptoms. So I think that the major way that you can treat this issue first depends on the severity. Some people need medication and they can get, an SSRI or some kind of antidepressant that can often help. The other thing is in the wintertime, we're not moving as much. So really driving home, like move, walk. If you are someone who is athletic, and you want to go to the gym, go, make sure you're really moving your body. And then of course, coming to therapy, I think just talking things out. Sometimes we think it's the weather, but underneath it, it's a lot of other stuff. And so maybe the weather can make us feel a little sad, but we're feeling really sad because there's a lot of other layers of things happening in our life. So if we can adjust and address some of those undercurrents, it makes maybe the issue around the weather feel a lot lighter, or it can make it easier to get out of your house and be more engaged in your life and your community, which is really the goal ultimately.
I've been reporting on Pittsburgh weather now for about 4 years, 2 of those while I was still local and around the city. I would say it's unique and ever-changing. That'd be how I would describe it. Pittsburgh's able to see all 4 seasons and all the different weather that goes on there, from snowstorms in the winter to some of the heat waves that we get in the summer. And while we don't see any major severe weather events, like Oklahoma is known for their tornadoes, the Gulf Coast is known for the hurricanes, Pittsburgh sees a whole variety of things, from flooding to we can get severe storms to snowstorms. And so it's always a challenge to forecast for Pittsburgh weather, and you always got to keep an eye to it because it affects everyday life, and you never know what you're going to get. Each place has its own challenges as far as forecasting goes. Pittsburgh has its own challenges, though, that make it unique because you have the mountains just off to the east again, and the storm centers tend to track right over Pittsburgh, so you'll get those ever-changing conditions. Whereas the farther south you go, here in Meridian, Mississippi, we don't see the center of the storm tracks go right across our area. So typically if we see a cold front moving through, you're going to get some thunderstorms. You just have to know the timing and where they're going to be. Whereas in Pittsburgh, you could go from rain to snow to sunshine all within one day because of where that storm is at. There's three factors, one of those being the Appalachian Mountains. Pittsburgh is on the west side of the mountains, so most weather systems track from west to east or maybe northwest as well. They can come out of that direction. And as the air travels that way, the air starts to travel up the mountain range, and as it goes up, it cools down. We get some condensation occurring, and that's what creates the cloudiness that we see across Pittsburgh. One of the other factors then too is just to the west, upstream in Ohio, there's a lot of established farmland and a lot of crops. And from these crops, you can get a lot of water added to the air through evaporation. And all that added moisture as it approaches Pittsburgh, goes up the mountain range. It helps to create, again, more cloud cover. And then the third factor would also be Pittsburgh is fairly close to the Great Lakes, just off to the northwest, and that's another moisture source. You can get a lot of water evaporating into the air and traveling over Pittsburgh and going up the mountains and creating some of that cloudiness. I have bumper stickers in the back of my car. I wear Native 412 gear. I always represent the Pittsburgh sports teams, and I always just try to have pride. I always tell people where I'm from, where I grew up, went to school, and always tell them that they're always welcome to come visit and experience what Pittsburgh has to offer, because I think that once people go and see the city and see the people and the culture, they'll never forget it. They'll always want to come back. Right now, you might have to wait because it's 30 degrees, partly cloudy, and there is a strong chance, though, being in Pittsburgh.
I worked corporate for years, and I got laid off in 2013. So since then, I've been a full-time DJ. And I travel from city to city playing records, so I make a living making folks dance. Pittsburgh weather, I mean, we have 4 seasons. Some cities do not. We don't see a lot of El Sol, so I would say Pittsburgh, yeah, it is a gloomy city, and that's just where we're located in Appalachia. We are the Paris of Appalachia, as they say. The crazy part is, I don't know if there's a name for us type of folk, but I am the rare breed that does not like sunny days. To me, a cloudy day in the 60s is so incredibly relaxing. There's something invigorating about a cloudy day as opposed to walking out, even on that same 60-degree day with intense sun. I don't know why they're complaining. What's changed? Can people complain about, an inch of snow, 2 inches of snow? We used to get 8 to 10 inches of snow. So I don't know what they're complaining about. I mean, you know where you live. If you can move to a warmer climate, very easily. So if you're in Pittsburgh and you complain about the weather, what are you complaining about?
I'm from Portland, Oregon. This is our 4th winter here in Pittsburgh. I think seasonal depression out there is no joke. I think it's interesting. I've never been anywhere where I've heard people complain about the weather more. Portland has a gray that seeps into your soul in both good and bad ways. And it's a gray that doesn't stop. But, if you're facing that same gray for weeks on end, I think it's intense. I think it can compel you to be really honest with your propensity for seasonal depression, or perhaps not. I think perhaps drive you deep into your own process to find ways to be creative and find ways to reframe that gray and introduce some color, perhaps. I didn't have as much of a practice to deal with seasonal depression then. I think I have more of a practice to deal with seasonal depression now. And maybe that's the natural outcrop of intense rain, but also breaks in the rain that we get in Pittsburgh, is that it makes me aware of how much my mood is affected by a longer winter or the variety of the weather. Sometimes I'll walk in it just to, sort of be in the weather and experience it, whether it's rain or snow or cold, or a brisk walk can do a lot to affect my mood. I think one of the things that I most like about Pittsburgh weather is that there's seasons. I think there's something sort of evocative and poetic about living a place that has seasons. We in our life have seasons, and I think our moods can have seasons, and even our creativity, like there's highs and lows, and there's a sort of a natural fluidity between more positive and negative vibes, and I think that there's room in your life for all of that, and there's a time and a place for it. as a minister, I'm mindful of the idea of seasons, both in my own life, in my own practices, in the lives of others, whether it's seasons of youth versus aging, or seasons of depression versus feeling more emotionally positive. That's there's something natural about the course of a year having sort of a slow trend of good and bad, and sometimes in equal measure. That feels like reality to me.